The rain hammered against the tall windows of Ashford Manor like angry fists. Celestine pressed her palm against the cold glass and watched the storm tear through the rose garden below. Her fingers left small prints on the foggy surface. She pulled her hand back and wiped it on her plain grey dress. "Celestine!" Mrs. Hathaway's voice echoed down the stone hallway. Celestine turned away from the window. Her heart jumped in her chest. The head housekeeper never shouted unless something was very wrong. "Coming, Mrs. Hathaway," Celestine called back. She gathered her skirts and hurried down the corridor. Her worn shoes made soft sounds against the marble floor. Mrs. Hathaway stood at the top of the grand staircase. Her face was red. Her white cap sat crooked on her grey hair. She pressed one hand against her chest and breathed hard. "The Duke has returned early," Mrs. Hathaway said between breaths. "He brings guests, important guests from London. We must prepare the East Wing immediately." Celestine's stomach tightened. She had heard about the Duke of Ashford. Everyone in the servants' quarters whispered about him. He was young for a duke, only 28. He had inherited the title 2 years ago when his father died. The servants said he was cold, distant. He rarely smiled. He spent most of his time in London, away from the manor. "How many guests?" Celestine asked. 6, Mrs. Hathaway said. 3 gentlemen and 3 ladies. They will stay for a fortnight. A fortnight. 2 whole weeks. Celestine had only worked at Ashford Manor for 3 months. She came from a village 10 miles away. Her father had been a teacher before he got sick. After he died, her mother struggled to keep food on the table. Celestine took the position as a housemaid to help. The pay was small, but it was something. "Gather the other girls," Mrs. Hathaway ordered. "Fresh linens for all 6 guest rooms, flowers in every vase. The Duke wants everything perfect." Celestine nodded and rushed down the stairs. Her mind raced. She had never served guests before. Mrs. Hathaway usually kept her working in the unused parts of the manor, away from the family and visitors. But today there was no choice. Every hand was needed. The Duke arrived as the sun broke through the storm clouds. Celestine stood in the servants' line near the kitchen entrance. She kept her eyes down as carriages rolled up the gravel drive. She heard voices, laughter, the sound of expensive boots on stone. "Stand straight," Mrs. Hathaway whispered sharply. "No fidgeting." Celestine straightened her spine. She folded her hands in front of her apron. Through her lowered lashes, she caught a glimpse of the Duke as he entered through the main doors. He was tall, very tall. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain. His coat fit perfectly across his broad shoulders. His face was hard angles and sharp lines. His jaw was set firm. His eyes were a deep gray, like storm clouds, but it was his expression that caught Celestine's attention. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from lack of sleep. It was something deeper, something heavy. The Duke barely glanced at the servants as he passed. His guests followed behind him. 3 men in fine suits, 3 women in silk dresses with elaborate hats. They chattered and laughed as they swept into the manor like colorful birds. "Back to work," Mrs. Hathaway ordered, once the party disappeared up the main staircase. Celestine released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That evening, Celestine helped serve dinner. Her hands shook as she carried a silver tray of wine glasses into the dining room. The room was enormous. A crystal chandelier hung from the painted ceiling. Candles flickered on the long mahogany table. The guests sat in high-backed chairs talking loudly. The Duke sat at the head of the table. His face remained expressionless as his guests laughed and gossiped. He barely touched his food. Celestine moved quietly along the wall, refilling glasses when they emptied. She tried to be invisible. That was the first rule Mrs. Hathaway had taught her. A good servant was never noticed. "This manor is absolutely stunning," one of the ladies said. She wore an emerald green dress that matched her eyes. "You must be so proud, Your Grace." The Duke lifted his glass but didn't drink. "It's a house," he said flatly. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. The lady's smile faltered. One of the gentlemen cleared his throat. "Come now, Thorne," he said, using the Duke's first name. "You're too modest. Ashford Manor is one of the finest estates in England." The Duke, Thorne, set down his glass. "My father cared about such things. I do not." Another silence. Celestine kept her eyes on the wine bottle in her hands. She could feel the tension in the room like a physical thing. The woman in green laughed, a forced sound. "Well, I think it's magnificent. Don't you agree, Lady Pemberton?" An older woman in purple silk nodded eagerly. "Oh, yes, absolutely magnificent." The conversation slowly resumed. Celestine moved to refill the Duke's glass. As she leaned forward, her sleeve caught on the edge of his chair. She stumbled. The wine bottle tipped. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth. Celestine's heart stopped. The room went silent. Every eye turned to her. I'm so sorry," she whispered. Her face burned. Her hands trembled as she tried to dab at the spreading stain with her apron. "Clumsy girl," the woman in green snapped. "Look what you've done." "I'm sorry," Celestine said again. Tears stung her eyes. She pressed her apron harder against the stain, but it only made it worse. "Step away from the table." The Duke's voice was quiet but firm. Celestine froze. She looked up and met his eyes for the first time. They were grey, yes, but up close she could see flecks of blue in them. He stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. "I said step away," he repeated. Celestine dropped her apron and took 3 quick steps back. She waited for him to call for Mrs. Hathaway, waited for him to dismiss her, send her away. But he didn't. Instead, he picked up his napkin and casually wiped a drop of wine from his sleeve. "Accidents happen," he said simply. He looked around the table. "Does anyone need anything else?" The guests exchanged glances. The woman in green opened her mouth, then closed it again. "No? Good." The Duke stood. "I'm retiring early. Enjoy your evening." He walked out of the dining room without another word. Celestine stood frozen against the wall. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Later that night, Celestine lay in her small bed in the servants' quarters. She stared at the ceiling and replayed the moment over and over. The wine spilling, the guests' shocked faces, the Duke's calm voice. Accidents happen. Why had he defended her? Most nobles would have had her punished. At the very least, they would have sent her away from the dining room in disgrace. But he hadn't. He had simply let it go. Celestine rolled onto her side. Through the thin walls, she could hear the other maids breathing in their sleep. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Something had shifted. She felt it like a change in the wind, but she didn't know what it meant yet. The next morning, Celestine woke before dawn. She dressed quickly in the dark and made her way to the kitchens. Cook was already awake, kneading dough for breakfast bread. The fire crackled in the huge stone hearth. "You're up early," Cook said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," Celestine admitted. She tied her apron and began pumping water into a large pot. "Still worried about last night?" Cook asked. Word travelled fast among the servants. Of course everyone knew about the spilled wine. "I made such a fool of myself," Celestine said quietly. Cook shaped the dough into round loaves. The Duke didn't seem angry. "That's what worries me," Celestine said. "Why wasn't he angry?" Cook finally looked up. Her round face was thoughtful. "The Duke is not like other nobles," she said slowly. "He's different. Keeps to himself mostly. But the staff who've been here longest say he's fair. Doesn't raise his voice. Doesn't strike servants." "That's rare," Celestine said. "Very rare." Cook dusted flour from her hands. His father was cruel. Everyone feared the old Duke. But when young Thorne inherited, things changed. He dismissed the worst of the staff his father employed. Increased wages. He doesn't care much for society or entertaining. Just wants things quiet. Celestine absorbed this information. It painted a different picture than she'd imagined, but it didn't explain why he'd been kind to her specifically. The kitchen door swung open. Mrs. Hathaway entered, her face tight with stress. "Celestine," she said sharply, "you're wanted upstairs." Celestine's stomach dropped. "Upstairs?" "The Duke has requested you specifically." Mrs. Hathaway's expression was unreadable. "Go to the library, immediately." Celestine untied her apron with shaking hands. Cook gave her an encouraging nod, but it did little to calm her nerves. The walk to the library felt like walking to the gallows. Celestine's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he had reconsidered. Maybe he'd decided to dismiss her after all. Maybe... She reached the library door and stopped. She smoothed her dress, took a breath, knocked softly. "Enter." Celestine pushed open the heavy door. The library was beautiful. Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling. A fire burned low in the hearth. Morning light streamed through tall windows. The Duke stood by one of the windows, his back to her. He wore no jacket, just a white shirt and dark trousers. His hands were clasped behind his back. "You wanted to see me, Your Grace." Celestine's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Close the door," he said without turning. Celestine obeyed. Her heart hammered. "What is your name?" he asked. "Celestine, Your Grace." Celestine. He tested the name. Then he finally turned to face her. His expression was still unreadable, but something in his eyes seemed curious. "How long have you worked here?" 3 months, Your Grace." "And before that?" Celestine hesitated. "I lived in the village with my mother." "Your father?" "He died 6 months ago." The Duke nodded slowly. He moved to the desk and picked up a small book. "Can you read, Celestine?" The question surprised her. "Yes, Your Grace. My father was a teacher. He taught me letters and numbers." Something flickered across the Duke's face. Interest, maybe. "That's unusual for a housemaid." Celestine didn't know what to say to that, so she stayed silent. The Duke set the book down. "I'm not going to dismiss you for what happened last night." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Your Grace. But I have a different task for you during my guest's stay." He moved closer, studying her face. "One of the ladies, Lady Pemberton, has brought her daughter. The girl is 16 and quite shy. She needs a companion, someone to help her dress, arrange her hair, keep her company. I'm told you're gentle and patient. Mrs. Hathaway recommended you." Celestine blinked in surprise. Mrs. Hathaway had recommended her? I would be honored, Your Grace," she said. "Good." He turned back to the window. "You'll start this afternoon. The girl's name is Margaret. She's in the Rose Room on the 2nd floor." "Yes, Your Grace." "That will be all." Celestine curtsied and turned to leave, but as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Celestine." She looked back. He still faced the window, but his shoulders seemed less tense. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not making a scene last night. Many would have cried or made excuses. You simply apologized and tried to fix it. That showed character." Celestine felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you, Your Grace." She slipped out before he could say anything else. Margaret Pemberton was exactly as the Duke described. 16, shy, with soft brown hair and wide hazel eyes. She reminded Celestine of a frightened deer. "You don't have to be nervous," Celestine said gently as she helped Margaret into a day dress. "I'm just here to help." "I'm not very good at this," Margaret admitted in a small voice. "All these parties and dinners. Mother says I need to make a good impression." "A good impression on whom?" Celestine asked, lacing up the back of the dress. Margaret's cheeks turned pink. "The Duke. Mother hopes he might notice me." Celestine's hands stilled for just a moment, then she continued lacing. "I see. Do you think he will?" Margaret turned to look at her, hope shining in her eyes. "Notice me, I mean." Celestine chose her words carefully. The Duke seems like a man who notices things when he's ready to, not before. It wasn't really an answer, but Margaret seemed satisfied. She smiled shyly. You're kind. I like you already. Celestine found herself smiling back. And I like you. We'll get through these 2 weeks together. Don't worry. The days fell into a pattern. Celestine helped Margaret dress each morning. She arranged the girl's hair and accompanied her to breakfast. She sat quietly in the corner during social activities, ready to assist if needed. And each evening, she helped Margaret prepare for bed while the girl chatted about the day's events. Lady Pembridge is so elegant, Margaret sighed one evening as Celestine brushed her hair. And Lord Ashton is so charming. They all seem to know exactly what to say and when to say it. I feel like such a child around them. You're not a child, Celestine said gently. You're just different. There's nothing wrong with that. Margaret met her eyes in the mirror. Do you really think so? I know so. But while Margaret talked, Celestine's mind often wandered. She thought about the Duke. She saw him every day now, at meals and in passing. He rarely spoke to his guests unless directly addressed. He spent most of his time in the library or out riding across the estate. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, she caught him looking at her. It wasn't an improper look. It was more like curiosity. The same expression he'd worn in the library that morning, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. It made her skin tingle in a way she didn't understand. But she pushed those thoughts away. He was a duke, she was a servant. That was all there was to it. Or so she told herself. On the 5th night, the Duke hosted a formal dinner party. Local nobles from neighbouring estates arrived in fancy carriages. The manor blazed with candlelight. Music drifted from the ballroom. Celestine helped Margaret into her finest dress, a pale blue silk with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice. The girl looked beautiful, though terrified. I don't want to go down, Margaret whispered. There will be so many people. You'll be fine, Celestine assured her. Just stay near your mother. Smile. Be yourself. Margaret clutched Celestine's hand. Will you be there? In the room? I'll be serving, Celestine said. I'll be nearby. That seemed to comfort Margaret. She took a deep breath and nodded. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across the polished floor. Ladies in jewel-toned gowns swept past in the arms of gentlemen in black coats. A string quartet played in the corner. Celestine moved among the guests with a tray of champagne glasses. She kept one eye on Margaret, who stood stiffly beside her mother near the refreshment table. Quite the event, isn't it? A male voice said near her elbow. Celestine turned to find one of the Duke's guests, Lord Ashton, smiling at her. He was handsome in a polished way, blonde hair, blue eyes, easy smile. Yes, my lord, Celestine said politely. She offered him the tray. He took a glass but didn't move away. I don't recognize you. Are you new? I've been here 3 months, my lord. Ah! His smile widened. And what's your name, lovely girl? Something about his tone made Celestine uncomfortable. Celestine, my lord. Celestine, he repeated, the same way the Duke had, but it sounded different coming from Lord Ashton. Oily, somehow. Pretty name for a pretty girl. Celestine curtsied slightly. Excuse me, my lord, I have duties. She tried to move past him, but he stepped into her path. His smile never wavered. So eager to run off? He said. Stay and talk a moment. I really must. Lord Ashton. The Duke's voice cut through the music and chatter like a blade. Lord Ashton's smile faltered. He turned. The Duke stood 3 feet away, his face carved from stone. Your Grace, Lord Ashton said, recovering quickly. I was just chatting with your charming housemaid. She has work to do, the Duke said flatly. His eyes flicked to Celestine. You're needed in the kitchen. Celestine didn't hesitate. She curtsied to both men and escaped into the crowd. But as she glanced back, she saw the Duke still staring at Lord Ashton. The look on his face was cold, dangerous. A shiver ran down her spine. But it wasn't fear. It was something else entirely. The incident with Lord Ashton repeated itself over the next few days. Not exactly the same, but similar. He found excuses to talk to her, to stand too close, to let his hand brush hers when she served him wine. And every time, the Duke appeared, like a shadow, like he'd been watching. He never said much, just a word or a look that sent Lord Ashton retreating. Then the Duke would walk away without acknowledging Celestine. It was confusing, infuriating, intriguing. "The Duke is very protective of his staff," Margaret commented one afternoon. She and Celestine sat in the garden while Margaret practiced her embroidery. "Mother says it's because he had a sister once." Celestine looked up from the flowers she was arranging. "A sister?" Margaret nodded. "She died when they were children. Scarlet fever. Mother says the Duke's father blamed the servants for not caring for her properly. He dismissed them all. The Duke never forgot it. He doesn't trust easily, but when he does..." She trailed off, focusing on her needlework. "When he does?" Celestine prompted. Margaret smiled softly. "When he does, he's fiercely loyal. That's what Mother says anyway." Celestine thought about this as she trimmed rose stems. It explained some things. The Duke's distance, his protective nature toward the staff, the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. But it didn't explain why he kept intervening with Lord Ashton specifically. She was just one maid among many. There was no reason for him to single her out. Unless... No, she crushed that thought before it could fully form. It was ridiculous, impossible. Yet the seed had been planted, and despite her best efforts, it began to grow. The turning point came on the 9th night. Celestine was walking back to the servants' quarters after helping Margaret to bed. The hallways were dark except for occasional oil lamps on the walls. Most of the guests had retired. The manor was quiet. She was passing the portrait gallery when she heard voices, angry voices. "Completely unreasonable." That was Lord Ashton. "I've made myself clear." The Duke's voice was ice. Celestine knew she should keep walking. Eavesdropping was grounds for dismissal. But her feet stopped of their own accord. "You invite us here, then treat us like prisoners," Lord Ashton continued. "We can't even speak to the servants without you hovering like some jealous..." "Careful," the Duke warned. "It's the girl, isn't it?" Lord Ashton laughed, but it was a cruel sound. "The little housemaid with the big eyes. Don't tell me the Duke of Ashford has developed a taste for..." The sound of a fist hitting flesh echoed through the gallery. Celestine gasped and clapped a hand over her mouth. Footsteps. She turned and ran, her heart in her throat. She didn't stop until she reached her room. She closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. The Duke had hit Lord Ashton. Because of her. Because Lord Ashton had implied... She couldn't even finish the thought. It was too dangerous. Too impossible. But the seed that had been planted earlier now burst into full bloom. The Duke didn't just notice her. He... cared? Protected her? Wanted? Celestine pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. This was madness. She was reading far too much into things. The Duke was a gentleman defending his servant's honor. That was all. It had to be. She climbed into bed and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. But sleep was impossible. Her mind raced, her heart pounded, and somewhere deep inside, in a place she didn't want to acknowledge, hope flickered to life. The next morning, Lord Ashton's face bore a purple bruise along his jaw. He left immediately after breakfast, claiming urgent business in London. No one questioned it, but the other guests whispered. Celestine heard fragments as she moved through the manor. Never seen him so angry. Just a servant, surely. Most improper. She kept her head down and her mouth shut. Margaret noticed the tension but was too polite to ask questions. Instead, she chattered nervously about the upcoming garden party planned for that afternoon. "All the local families will attend," Margaret said as Celestine arranged her hair. "Mother says it's the social event of the season. She wants me to wear my yellow dress. Do you think the yellow or the pink? The yellow brings out your eyes, Celestine said automatically. Her mind was elsewhere. Celestine? Margaret turned in her chair. Are you all right? You seem distracted. I'm fine, Celestine lied. Just tired. Margaret didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. The garden party was indeed grand. Long tables covered in white linen held elaborate cakes and sandwiches. Servants circulated with trays of lemonade and tea. Ladies carried parasols to shade their faces from the sun. Gentlemen stood in clusters, smoking cigars and discussing politics. Celestine helped serve refreshments. She tried to stay invisible, but it was difficult. Her mind kept wandering to the Duke. Where was he? What was he thinking? Did he regret hitting Lord Ashton? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the woman until she was right in front of her. You there, girl! Celestine looked up. The woman was older, perhaps 50, dressed in an expensive lavender gown. Jewels glittered at her throat. Her face was pinched with displeasure. Yes, my lady, Celestine said. Fetch me more tea. This has gone cold. Of course, my lady. Celestine reached for the cup, but as she took it, the woman leaned closer. Her perfume was overpowering. Her eyes were sharp. You're the one, aren't you? The woman said quietly. The one causing all this fuss. Celestine's blood went cold. I don't understand, my lady. Don't play innocent with me, girl. The woman's voice was low but venomous. I saw how Lord Ashton looked at you. I saw how the Duke intervened, and I heard what happened last night. I didn't. You're just a servant, the woman hissed. Know your place. Whatever foolish ideas you've gotten into your head, forget them. A duke does not marry beneath him. He uses girls like you and discards them. If you have any sense, you'll leave this manor before you're ruined. Each word was a knife. Celestine felt her face burn. Her eyes stung. But she refused to cry. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction. I'll fetch your tea, Celestine said quietly. She turned away, but she'd only taken 2 steps when another voice rang out across the garden. Lady Worthington! Everyone fell silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned. The Duke stood at the edge of the garden, tall and imposing in his dark coat. His face was thunderous. He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. The crowd parted before him like water. He stopped directly in front of the woman, Lady Worthington. His grey eyes were cold as winter frost. I believe you have something to say to Celestine, he said. His voice was quiet but carried across the silent garden. Lady Worthington's face went pale, then red. Your Grace, You insulted her, the Duke continued. You suggested things about her character that are not only untrue, but deeply offensive. Didn't you? The woman's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She's just a servant. The Duke took 1 step closer. She's just a servant, he repeated, his voice dropping even lower. Dangerous. Is that what you said? The entire garden held its breath. Then the Duke turned slightly so he faced both Lady Worthington and the assembled guests. When he spoke again, his voice rang clear and firm. Let me be perfectly clear. He looked at Celestine, and something in his expression softened. Just for a moment. Celestine is not just a servant. She is intelligent, kind, and more graceful than half the people here. She has shown me more genuine honesty in 3 months than most of you have in years. Celestine couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Every eye was on her, but she could only stare at the Duke. And furthermore, the Duke continued, his gaze returning to Lady Worthington, she is going to be my wife. The world stopped spinning. Gasps erupted around the garden. Margaret's teacup shattered on the ground. Mrs. Hathaway, standing near the house, swayed and caught herself on a pillar. Your wife, Lady Worthington sputtered. But that's impossible. She's my future Duchess, the Duke said firmly. He looked around at the shocked faces. And I suggest you all remember that, starting with an apology. Now." Lady Worthington looked like she might faint, or argue, but the Duke's expression left no room for debate. She turned to Celestine with visible effort. I apologize," she forced out. "Louder," the Duke said. "I apologize." Lady Worthington's voice cracked. Humiliated tears sprang to her eyes. The Duke nodded once. Then he turned his back on her and walked directly to Celestine. He stopped in front of her. Up close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the question in his eyes. "Come with me," he said softly. He offered his arm. Celestine stared at it. Her mind was chaos. Nothing made sense. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of dream or joke or... "Please," the Duke added, even quieter. "Trust me." And somehow, despite everything, she did. She placed her hand on his arm. His coat was soft beneath her fingers. He covered her hand with his own, warm and steady, and led her away from the garden. Behind them, the whispers exploded like fireworks. The Duke brought her to the library. "I have no logical reason to feel this way, but I do." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek. "When Lord Ashton spoke about you that way, I wanted to do more than just hit him. When Lady Worthington insulted you, something in me snapped. I couldn't stand there and let them treat you like you were nothing." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. Celestine shivered. "So yes," he said quietly, "I meant it. Every word. If you'll have me, and I know it's asking everything of you, I would be honored if you became my wife, my Duchess, my partner." Celestine closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't know if they were tears of joy or fear or sheer, overwhelming emotion. "Everyone will hate me," she said. "Your peers, society. They'll say I trapped you, seduced you, used you." "Let them say it." His other hand came up to cup her face. "I don't care." "Your reputation is already unconventional. I might as well make it official." Celestine opened her eyes. He was smiling, actually smiling. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger, lighter. "What about love?" she asked. "You said you've known me 9 days. That's not enough time to fall in love." His smile softened. "Isn't it? I think I started falling the moment you spilled that wine and looked at me like you expected the world to end. But it didn't. And neither will this." He was so close. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell cedar and rain, could see the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. And she realized, with startling clarity, that she'd been falling too. "I don't know how to be a duchess," she said. "I'll teach you. I don't know how to navigate society. We'll learn together. I'm terrified." "So am I." That admission broke something open inside her. She laughed, though tears still streamed down her face. "You're the Duke of Ashford. You're not afraid of anything." "I'm afraid of losing you before I truly have you," he said seriously. "I'm afraid you'll wake up tomorrow and realize this was a mistake. I'm afraid I'll fail you somehow." Celestine reached up and covered his hands with hers. They were warm, strong, steady. "I don't think you will," she said softly. "Fail me, I mean." Hope blazed in his eyes. Is that a yes? Was it? Could she really do this? Step into a world she didn't understand? Become someone she'd never imagined being? But as she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw not a duke, but a man. A man who was lonely. A man who was tired of pretending. A man who saw her, truly saw her, and wanted her anyway. "Yes," she whispered. The Duke, Thorn, exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Then he leaned down and kissed her. It was soft, gentle, tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. Celestine rose up on her toes and kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into it. All her fear and hope and impossible, crazy joy. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Thorn rested his forehead against hers. "I promise," he murmured, "to spend every day proving you made the right choice." Celestine smiled through her tears. "And I promise to keep you honest, and probably spill wine on you occasionally." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rusty, like he hadn't done it in a long time, but it was beautiful. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. The scandal was immediate and intense. Half the guests left Ashford Manor within hours. Lady Worthington departed in high dudgeon, vowing never to return. Margaret's mother tried to convince her daughter that the Duke was having some kind of breakdown, but Margaret surprised everyone by defending Celestine. "She's kind," Margaret said firmly, "and if the Duke loves her, that's all that matters." The remaining guests seemed divided. Some were horrified, others were intrigued. A few seemed almost envious, like they wished they had the courage to do something so scandalous. The Duke didn't seem to care about any of it. He spent the next few days calmly making arrangements. He sent for a solicitor from London to draw up marriage contracts. He ordered new dresses for Celestine from the finest modiste. He introduced her to the estate steward so she could begin learning her future duties. Celestine moved through it all in a daze. It felt surreal, like she was watching someone else's life unfold. But Thorn was patient. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply included her, asked her opinion, listened when she spoke, made sure she knew she could change her mind at any time. "You're not trapped," he told her one evening as they walked through the rose garden. "If you decide this is too much, I'll release you. No judgment, no consequences." Celestine looked up at him. The setting sun turned his dark hair copper, made his grey eyes almost silver. "Do you want me to change my mind?" she asked. "God, no." He caught her hand and laced their fingers together. "But I want you to be sure. I want you to choose this. Choose me, because you want to, not because you feel obligated." Celestine squeezed his hand. "I'm sure," she said. And she was. Terrified, yes, but sure. They were married 3 weeks later in the manor's private chapel. It was a small ceremony. Just the vicar, Mrs. Hathaway, cook, and a few of the household staff who had become Celestine's friends. Thorn had wanted to wait longer, give Celestine more time to adjust, but Celestine refused. "If we wait, people will talk even more," she said. "They'll say you came to your senses, changed your mind. Let's just do it." So they did. Celestine wore a simple white dress that somehow made her look like a queen. Her dark hair was arranged with tiny white flowers. She carried a bouquet of roses from the garden. Thorn wore black and silver. He looked impossibly handsome, and when Celestine walked down the short aisle to him, his eyes shone with emotion. The vows were traditional, but when Thorn slid the ring onto her finger, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his mother, Celestine felt the weight of what they were doing. They were binding their lives together, forever. And when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, and Thorn kissed her gently in front of their small audience, Celestine thought her heart might burst. The wedding breakfast was held in the small dining room. Cook had outdone herself with cakes and pastries. The staff toasted the new Duke and Duchess with champagne. Mrs. Hathaway cried openly, which was so unexpected that everyone else started crying too. "I knew," Mrs. Hathaway said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "From the first day you arrived, I knew you were special." "You did not," Cook teased. "You told me she was too dreamy and would probably break all the china." Everyone laughed, including Celestine. It felt good to laugh, to be surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her. Later, as the sun set, Thorn took Celestine's hand and led her upstairs. Not to the Duke's chambers, as she'd expected, but to a different room entirely. "I had this prepared for you," he said, opening the door. Celestine gasped. The room was beautiful, soft blue walls, a large window overlooking the gardens, and books, shelves and shelves of books. "You said your father was a teacher," Thorn said quietly. I thought you might want a place that was yours, where you could read, think, be yourself." Celestine turned to him with tears in her eyes. "You did this for me?" "I'll do anything for you," he said simply. She kissed him then, not soft or tentative like before, but deep and fierce. Thorn made a surprised sound, then wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back just as fiercely. They stumbled toward the bed, still kissing. Celestine's hands fumbled with the buttons of his coat. Thorn gently untied the laces of her dress. They broke apart long enough to shed layers of clothing, then came back together like magnets. "Are you certain?" Thorn murmured against her lips. "We can wait if you—" "I'm certain," Celestine said. "I want this. I want you." So he loved her. Slowly, tenderly, taking his time to learn every inch of her, and Celestine loved him back, marveling at the feel of his skin against hers, the weight of him, the way he whispered her name like a prayer. Afterward they lay tangled together in the candlelight. Thorn traced patterns on her bare shoulder. Celestine listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I have a confession," Thorn said after a long silence. "Oh?" Celestine tilted her head to look at him. He smiled ruefully. "I didn't just notice you because you spilled wine. I noticed you the day I arrived. You were standing by the window in the servants' hall. The light was behind you. You looked like something out of a painting. I couldn't stop thinking about you." Celestine's eyebrows rose. "You didn't say anything." "I didn't know what to say. 'Hello, I'm the Duke, and I find you inexplicably fascinating' seemed inappropriate." He kissed her forehead. "So I asked Mrs. Hathaway about you instead. She said you were smart and kind and hard-working. It only made me more curious." "Is that why you asked for me specifically? To tend to Margaret?" "Partly," he admitted. "I wanted to observe you, get to know you without the pressure of, well, this." He gestured at their entwined bodies. "But the more I saw, the more I wanted. And then Lord Ashton started circling like a vulture, and I couldn't stand it." Celestine laughed softly. "You punched him." "I'd do it again," Thorn said without hesitation. "And worse, if anyone ever speaks about you that way again." "My fierce Duke," Celestine teased, but her heart warmed at the protectiveness in his voice. They fell silent again, comfortable, content. "What happens now?" Celestine asked eventually. "Society will never accept me." "Some won't," Thorn agreed, "but some will. And honestly, I've never cared much for society anyway. Let them gossip. We have each other. We have this estate. We'll build our own life, on our own terms." It sounded wonderful. Impossible, but wonderful. "I love you," Celestine said suddenly. She hadn't planned to say it, but it burst out anyway. "I know it's fast. I know it's crazy. But I do. I love you." Thorn went very still. Then he rolled them over so he was looking down at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "I love you too," he said fiercely. "I think I have since that first night. Maybe before. Maybe I was just waiting my whole life to find you." They kissed again, slow and sweet, and as the candles burned low and the moon rose outside the window, Celestine thought that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could come true, even for a housemaid. 6 months later. Celestine stood in the same spot where she'd once pressed her palm against the window as a servant. But everything was different now. She wore a gown of deep blue silk. Her hair was arranged elaborately with jeweled pins. A sapphire necklace, a gift from Thorn, glittered at her throat. She looked every inch a duchess. But inside, she still felt like herself. Just more. "Are you ready?" Thorn appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "As ready as I'll ever be," Celestine said. Tonight they were hosting their first major event as Duke and Duchess, a ball for the entire county. It had taken months to plan. Celestine had been terrified at first, but with Thorn's help, and surprising assistance from Margaret, who had become a dear friend, she'd learned the steps. The protocol. The dance. "You'll be magnificent," Thorn murmured. "You already are." Celestine turned in his arms. "Even if I spill wine on someone?" He grinned. "Especially then." The ball was indeed magnificent. Hundreds of candles blazed, music soared, guests arrived in glittering waves. And yes, there were whispers, stares, a few openly hostile looks. But there were also smiles, friendly faces, people who approached Celestine with genuine warmth and curiosity. And when Thorn led her onto the dance floor for the first waltz, holding her like she was made of spun glass and starlight, Celestine felt like the luckiest woman in the world. "See?" Thorn whispered as they spun across the polished floor. "You belong here. You always did." Celestine looked around at the beautiful room, the elegant guests, the life she'd somehow stumbled into. But mostly, she looked at him. Her husband, her love, her unexpected, impossible, perfect match. "No," she said softly. "I belong with you. That's all that matters." Thorn smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his whole face. "Then we're exactly where we're meant to be." And as they danced beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by music and light, Celestine believed him. She was no longer just a servant. She was no longer just a girl from the village. She was the Duchess of Ashford. She was loved. She was home. And every single day, she chose it all over again. 1 year later, a baby girl was born at Ashford Manor. She had her father's grey eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Eleanor, after Thorn's lost sister. Celestine held the baby in the same library where Thorn had first asked her name. She sat in the window seat, the same window where she'd once stood as a nervous housemaid. Thorn sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders, staring at their daughter with wonder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Marrying me? Becoming this?" Celestine looked at him, at the man who had seen her, chosen her, loved her when the world said it was impossible. "Never," she said firmly, "not for a single second." And she meant it. The road hadn't been easy. There had been struggles, cruel gossip, social missteps, moments when Celestine wanted to hide away and pretend none of it was happening. But Thorn had been there for all of it, steady, patient, loving. He never let her forget who she was, never asked her to be anything but herself. And slowly, society had come around. Not all of it, but enough. People saw how Thorn looked at her, how she managed the estate with grace and intelligence, how the servants adored her, how she founded a school for village children, remembering her father's love of teaching. They saw a love story, a real one, the kind that didn't fit into neat boxes or follow proper rules. And some of them, the ones who mattered, respected it. "I love you," Thorn said, kissing her temple. "Both of you. My two perfect girls." Celestine leaned into him, their baby cradled between them. Outside, the sun was setting over the gardens. The roses were in full bloom. The manor glowed golden in the light. It was perfect. Not because it was easy or expected, but because it was theirs. And that made all the difference.